hurricanes are the #1 threat, natural disaster threat to our state. We are the third most visited over the past 100 years by hurricanes making landfall in the continental United States. Texas first, Florida second, and us third. And the predictions, as you also probably know, have been for an average to perhaps even below average hurricane season. But as I have been saying of late, all it takes is one. And I would point out that back in 1992, there were only 6 named storms that year, but one of them was named Andrew. And it first made landfall in Homestead, Florida, and devastated that area, including the loss of hundreds of lives, and then made a second landfall just west of Morgan City as a Category 3 hurricane, causing almost $500 million in insured damage in our state. So that lesson suggests to us that we need to be ever vigilant as each hurricane season approaches, and be ready first and foremost to heed the warnings of our elected officials when they order an evacuation. I'm mindful every year at this time of the year, and again on August 29th, of the 1,600 of our fellow citizens who lost their lives in the Katrina event. And 3 weeks later, as a result of the lessons learned in Katrina, no lives were lost as a direct result of Hurricane Rita, our second worst hurricane event in the history of the state, when it made landfall in the southwest corner of Louisiana. Approximately 35% of all flood claims against under the National Flood Insurance Program are made for properties that are in what's considered to be low-risk areas. That means they're considered to be high and dry and not likely to be subjected to flood events, like the Grand Ole Opry that 2 years ago experienced a severe flood in the relatively high land of downtown Nashville, Tennessee. So that as we go into this season, I would also like to take this opportunity to urge every property owner in our state to access the National Flood Insurance Program. It is certainly the best insurance buy a consumer can make in our state, from Shreveport or Oil City north of Shreveport to Grand Isle south of New Orleans. Every property should take advantage of the National Flood Insurance Program. However, only 1/3 of the properties in our state are insured for flood. And in the Katrina Rita experiences of 2005, 40% of the victims of those 2 hurricanes had flood insurance in place. Additionally, I would like to also urge everyone to be aware of what their coverages are. Their insurance, well, before I do that, let me also mention, before leaving the flood insurance program, that the limits for the National Flood Insurance Program are $250,000 for a structure and an additional $100,000 for contents. Having said that, there is excess flood insurance available from the private market. That can be gotten through an agent or producer and should be looked into for anyone who has potential flood damage exceeding those relatively low limits that apply to the National Flood Insurance Program. The other insurance advice that I would have for consumers at this time of year is to do an inventory of your insurance needs and your coverages that you have in place, beginning, of course, with property insurance. Know what your coverage is, know what your deductible is. Self-insure for as much as you feel you can afford to take on in the way of a higher deductible, but know what your deductible is. After Katrina, when Katrina hit in 2005, named storm deductibles were unusual. I happen to have one of 2% applicable to my claim in 2005, and the Citizens Residual Market had a 2% named storm deductible in place as well. But I would say in 2005, most policies still had just a all perils deductible of $500 or $1,000 or maybe $2,500. After Katrina and Rita in 2005, almost all companies began using a named storm deductible on homeowners policies statewide, as high as 5% of not your claim, but 5% of your insured value. And when that was put in place, as I said at the outset, not a lot of our 4 million plus fellow citizens was aware of that change in their policy. And so when 2 years later, 3 years later, Hurricane Gustav came through our state, many were shocked to learn that they had a up to 5% named storm deductible applicable to their claim for damage caused by that named storm. So that makes the point again of know what your coverage is, know what your self-insured retention or deductible is, know what your contents needs for coverage are, and make sure you have that insurance in place. While at it, you might as well do a checkup on all of your other insurance needs as well. Auto insurance, maybe shopping, the many companies that are competing with each other for business in our market statewide these days, and every other form of insurance, long-term care, health insurance, life insurance, etc. While at it, make a quick review of what you have available in the way of coverage and what your needs may be that aren't covered at the present time. And in preparation for the hurricane season, I would also strongly urge everyone to do an inventory of their assets. Make a list of what you have in the way of expensive equipment, jewelry, vulnerable equipment or furnishings, and have that list readily available to be taken with you upon evacuating out of the way of an approaching hurricane or storm. Will be very helpful to you in making a claim in the event of damage caused by a hurricane during this hurricane season. But also be a valuable tool to have for claims during the rest of the year. Fire damage, frozen pipe eruptions that cause damage and necessitate the filing of a claim. When you evacuate, take your policies with you and also take the contact information for you to be able to reach out to your agent to initiate the claims process after a loss when visited by a hurricane. Having said those things, I'd like to stop at this point and open it for any questions any of you might have regarding the subject matter, or for that matter, any other subject that is of interest. This is my beginning of my annual storm tour as we get into the hurricane season. June 1 to November 30, the 6 months of the year that represent the greatest threat of natural disaster in our state, at least. Others have earthquake problems and wildfires and tornadoes and hailstorms. For us, it's all about hurricanes, and we are going back 100 years, the third most often visited by hurricane state of the continental, 48, and only behind Texas and Florida. So the message is be prepared, and specifically, first and foremost, heed evacuation warnings. 1,600 of our fellow citizens lost their lives in the Katrina event, even though the contraflow evacuation system worked as designed for that event, helping 1 million folks get out of harm's way in the days leading up to Katrina in the metropolitan New Orleans area. But we will not forget the horrible pictures and stories that were part of that catastrophe. Those lessons should teach us to heed those warnings and protect ourselves and our families, and in addition to that, protect our property. To do that requires a checkup on your insurance coverages, what's in place, what's not there, what you have in the way of deductibles, named storm deductible, what have you, limits on the amount of coverage that comes with the National Flood Insurance Program. Be aware of those limitations. Be aware of those coverages that you have purchased and are there to protect your property after a hurricane visits our area. So with that in mind, I would urge everyone to A, contact their producer or agent, go over those coverages. B, make a list of your assets in the event that you are going to have to file a claim after a hurricane event. It would be very handy to have done that preparation ahead of time. And thirdly, when evacuating, take with you copies of your policy and the contact information for your agent or producer so that you can begin the claims process as soon as possible after you've suffered a loss.
How does someone obtain flood insurance, and what are the advantages?
Through an agent or producer, and it covers you for all forms of flood, not just those associated with storm surge from a hurricane. Last year, here in Louisiana, we were threatened with spring floods that necessitated the opening of the Atchafalaya Spillway and the Bonnie Carey Spillway, and even here in Baton Rouge, extra balloon structures were put on top of the levees to provide protection against the Mississippi that was up to the very top of the levee in the metropolitan Baton Rouge area. So that kind of flooding, spring flooding, is covered by the National Flood Insurance Program. With Gustav in 2008, as it came ashore west of Houma and crossed Baton Rouge and headed to North Louisiana, with 2 days of 10-inch rainfall back-to-back, flooding hundreds of homes in Alexandria and Monroe in North Louisiana. People wouldn't anticipate that a hurricane threatens to flood properties in North Louisiana. And then 2 years ago, with just rainstorm again, the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville, Tennessee was flooded out and had to call upon its flood insurance policy for coverage. Again, just lessons to be learned that in Louisiana, the best insurance buy one can make is the federally subsidized National Flood Insurance Program.
If people have questions or would like more information, what should they do?
Please contact us, 1-800-259-5300. That's what we're there to do, is protect consumers and advise them on insurance issues. Those issues are always complex, expensive, and vital. So we're happy to hear from anyone in your audience who has any concerns or questions about insurance issues. Those who are computer literate can go to our website at ldi.la.gov, and a lot of those questions can be answered there as well.